Untamed is going to be untamed. It's going to be a little crazy. I want to talk to my people. I want to talk to my brothers and sisters. We can have grace and humility in how we interact with other people.
Oh, hot dog, look at you.
And nobody talked about what's really happening. And let's have conversations about what truth is.
Hi, everyone. Patrick here, and we got a great interview on tap for you today. Joe interviews Pastor Sam Jones, a man on a mission who's fighting the genocide in Nigeria for Christians. What a heart-stopping, gut-wrenching interview Pastor Sam Jones provided with Joe today. He unpacks what is truly going on in Nigeria and the genocide facing many Christians just for simply being a Christian and believing in God. You won't believe what you hear in this interview today. So sit tight, watch, learn, and share the information.
What a day today. What a day today. What a day. So I'll start off by saying this. I decided to trip and fall when I was bringing some stuff in earlier and busted my knee. I was like, man, I cannot believe that I was dumb enough to walk on a wet surface, and then maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. It's a typical Monday. But before I tell you about that and falling, I let the dogs out. And I was like, okay, I'm going to let them out. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. And lo and behold, just as I let them out, they go taking off. I see this black silhouette sitting on the wall. It was a skunk. So before I could get any words out, just any words at all, I screamed, no, as I see this puff, whatever you want to call it, go into the mouth of one of my dogs, like in his face. And my other dog comes running up because they're sisters, and she gets hit. And I'm thinking to myself, why it's too early for this. It's way too early for this. So I will tell you, it has been a lack of sleep day for me. And I just jumped right into it this morning, thinking I could just get my day started. And we have an amazing guest today. But besides having an amazing guest who's also a pastor, we're going to talk through some things with him. I'm going to have some questions of him about Israel specifically. I know it's not exactly what we're going to be talking about, but we're going to be talking about some of the Christians that are being killed over in Africa. But I have some other things. I want to talk about really quick, and I don't have a lot of time with him. I know he couldn't stay for the full amount, so we're recording a little bit of this beforehand. But Tina Peters. So she is currently out of solitary confinement. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to talk about Lara Logan's interview with Gary Burnson and drops bombs on stolen elections. If you haven't seen that, you have to see it. It's pretty amazing. You know, I start looking at in totality, everything that we deal with related to the elections. And one of these little pricks said something that I thought was interesting. And that is, you know, I had this person that I used to work with that made calls to book for me, and called my assistant and said, her name's Mermaid, and said that Joe doesn't have any credibility. I don't have any credibility. Let me just explain to you all something very interesting. I'm the only one in all of this, other than people like Patrick Byrne, obviously, and Mike Flynn, who've actually accomplished something in their lives. In other words, I built everything that I have on my own. I built a couple tech companies, one of which I built from a cocktail napkin to where it is, or where it was in 2020. Everything that I've done, nobody ever handed me a dollar. Nobody said, we're going to give you something. And I have had to fight through the last 30 years. I don't know of a lot of people who have the ability to overcome the things that I've overcome. And when you tell me I don't have credibility, all I do is basically say, piss off. I mean, I worked in the Middle East and Africa. I was in places that I had no business being. And in large part, I found myself in that same position here in early January of 2021. But had I not come forward with the information about Eric Coomer, and had I not been on that call, and had I not, all these had I nots, we never would have looked under the hood of Dominion. I truly believe that, because that was kind of the genesis of, okay, let's look into these machines. Let's not, first it was like, hey, they brought in all these ballots and they're cheating by ballots. And then we really started to examine the machines, which would explain why for the last 5 years I've gone through this lawsuit. But Lara Logan put a kind of an explanation point on it. And if you take what Lara has said, you take the information we have on Dominion, you take my Substack, which goes through kind of how the genesis of who was involved in this, dating all the way back to Smartmatic and Sequoia. His name is Eric Coomer. And there's a reason why they're fighting against me. First of all, they've done all their analysis on me. They're like, yeah, this guy Joe, he doesn't know how to quit. We could beat him to death, and he's just not going to stop. And the truth is, I'm not going to stop. It's very true. I don't fear a lot. I fear God, not in a way that makes me like shudder, but I fear the fact that I would go down the wrong path and not follow the things that He has in my life for me. So. But if you look at the totality of all the information that we've had, and you look at the 4 reports from Tina Peters, which Mark Cook was a part of, and I'm forgetting that guy's name. He calls himself the Raccoon. If you take all that information, it's hard to ignore. And you look at the history, you know that it's gaslighting. You know this is just a long charade, and the charade has gotten so bad that I started thinking to myself, what would possess someone like Eric to get on a call and to brag about things? And then I went back and looked at all of his posts and things that he did, and it's a self-indulgence thing for him. I started looking at the fact he probably called in, and he probably did it because he was either high or drunk. You pick it, right? But just a really bad guy with bad behaviors all the way around. But I did put out an X post naming Eric Coomer, and I got to tell you, Tina Peters is 70 years old. She's in jail. You have people in Colorado that have been let out of prison after doing things like trying to abduct a young child. They've done really bad things. The same judge in this case let someone go. He had enough fentanyl to kill everyone in the state of Colorado, and he let that person go for trafficking with just probation. And so the entire system is designed to treat us like slaves. And even though we've uncovered it, we sit back and we just kind of wait. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about some other bizarro things that I see happening, what they're doing to ICE, frankly, this whole thing in Dearborn, Michigan, which has gotten a little bit out of hand and now has put kind of a spotlight on, can't we just get rid of all those illegals? Because you know that there's a ton of them there in Dearborn. There's a ton of them. But we'll talk about that as well. So let's start with this. This is the update on Tina Peters. If you haven't seen it before, I'm going to give it to you right now. So Tina has been moved out of solitary. She's out. I think a lot of that has to do with just the calls that we've made. We're grateful for the facility for performing an investigation quickly and moving Tina back to a normal cell quickly. Here are the concerns for her safety, but at least she's not in isolation. Please continue to pray for Tina for a ruling from the judge. And if you can support her expenses, please go to tinapeters.us. God bless Tina Peters. So we'll start there. Then I want to just shortcut. This is a cut from Lara Logan's interview with former CIA operations officer Gary Bernson, who explains how elections are being stolen in America. And there's some other things I want to go through a little later, but I'm going to bring our guest in first. But I just want to go through these 3. Let's go ahead and play it.
They know where they can find the dead people that they need to get certain votes. They plan this, as Gary said before.
It's meticulous.
It's meticulous. These guys are experts at this. It's not just a few guys in a back room. You're talking about hundreds of statisticians and engineers, and they work it, for a year.
And mathematicians and hackers.
Right.
We had a map out of Colorado when we were talking to our engineers, the guys that designed it, stole the elections. And we looked at it and we said, look, it's Denver here and Colorado Springs, all the Democrats, and they looked at us in pity,
Yeah.
Like, you guys aren't. They said, no. We just go to every one place where Trump went 70-30 and he's winning 68, or we shave in every other place. We don't go near a Democratic place because when they want to do recounts, they're going to go to the Democratic places. They don't realize we shaved in every other committee. We know every other county. We know how to do this. And then in each of those things where they shave with a different technique in each one of those. So if you found something in one county, there's no continuity around the state that way.
So this is why the Republicans are so much at fault, because they have the power and the ability to show in their areas. They can allow access to the machines. They can allow access to the source code. They can allow the...
But they thought we just won by 35%. Okay, we didn't win by 38.
Yeah.
We won by 35, so no one's going to call to... They should have, right?
Because everyone says, well, we expected the Republicans to win by a majority. Oh, it was a little less than we thought it was going to be, but they still won, so, no harm, no foul. But the evidence of the fraud is right there, and they could show it. They
never looked at it.
So he's partially right about what they're saying. But again, it's like, look over here, not over there. I'm gonna skip through some of the other stuff that we'll talk about after our guest leaves. But I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. His name is Sam Jones. He's a pastor. He's a voice for the preborn. We're not going to call it the unborn. It is the preborn. And he's also the author of a book called 5 Steps to Kill a Nation. I'm going to just bring him in. So he leads Abundant Life Christian Fellowship in Humboldt, Iowa, guiding the congregation with a Christ honoring vision. Sam, welcome to the show.
Joe, it's good to be on here. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good. Very good. I'm on fire more than I was yesterday, but kind of working through it.
Yeah, I have to be honest too. I'm glad that we're doing this virtually, especially after your dog got hit by a skunk. I don't know if any of that got on you or not, but I'm glad I don't have to smell you at least today, but I am glad to be on the show.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. You wake up in the morning, think to yourself, you know what? I think I'm going to get my dog hit by a skunk, and then I'm going to have to get out some Dawn dish detergent and some hydrogen peroxide. I felt like I was prepared for it, though. I felt like I had enough stuff in the house that got me through it. I was able to clean up my dogs, but yeah, pretty crazy.
That's good. The hydrogen peroxide works good too. We had a dog that, man, it seemed like he'd get hit about once a month. They're growing up. I don't know. He just never learned. And so a lot of that tomato juice, but peroxide, I think, works better. So glad you had that.
We went through 2 bottles of it, so I hope it works really well.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's just jump into this, because I'm going to have an extra question for you or two related to this, but I want to talk about the Christians that were killed in Nigeria since 2009. And first of all, I'll just say this. I worked in the Middle East and Africa. I'd been to Niger Delta. I'd been to Nigeria. I'd been all over North, East, West Africa. Why are we just hearing about it now in 2025? Why is it that we were screaming about this decades ago?
Yeah, actually, one of the kind of key attacks that happened was actually there in 2001 on 9/11, the same time when our Twin Towers were getting hit and the whole world was looking at that. That's really when the genesis of the persecution in Nigeria happened. So I mean, it's been happening for a while. The last 5 years, we've had 90% of Christian persecution deaths or martyrdoms have happened right there in Nigeria. So this is a major thing. Our numbers is that we've had over 7,500 Christians that have been martyred this year. And that's direct martyrdom. That's not, after Muslims come down and they attack a village and they drive the Christians out of their village. And then there they are made as IDPs, or internally displaced persons, essentially refugees in their own country. What ends up happening is that they end up dying. Some of them end up starving to death. Some of them end up dying because of poor hygiene and just not having access to anything. And so health issues come up. We're not even counting those numbers. We're just talking about the direct numbers of Christians that are being martyred with this. But the reason why people aren't hearing about it today is because one is propaganda. There's a red-green axis, those of the communists and those of the Muslims that have come together. And so they put out their propaganda and they have stopped the message from actually going out as to what's happening in Nigeria. And right now, the Nigerian government is putting out that it's not a Christian genocide. Instead, they're saying what's happening is that it's just a farmer-herder conflict or a tribal conflict or something like that. But that's not the case. It is actually Muslims that are coming down, the Fulani ethnic militia that is coming down, and they're actually trying to kill Christians and to drive them from their land. It's jihad that's happening. But even when news does go out, which isn't often in Nigeria because it has to all run through the government, what ends up happening is it goes through the AP, which Al Jazeera then takes it. And of course, they sterilize it and they change what's actually happening. And so you might hear when a big attack happens that there were 100 Christians that died in Nigeria. But it's not going to come across as Christians. It's going to come across as 100 Nigerians died in some kind of a farmer herder conflict or some tribal conflict. And so there's a lot of things that's going on right now, but a lot of it comes down to corruption and, of course, this red-green axis of Marxists and Islam that's taken route, that's trying to unseat the West and unseat Christianity.
Okay, so let me just kind of there's something that you probably need to know about Nigeria. One, it is rich in resources.
Absolutely.
So let's just talk about the elephant in the room: CIA involvement in Africa and the Middle East, and some of the kind of direct destruction of the sovereignty of nations. We know that they did it in other nations like Sudan, Libya, and now they're in Nigeria. So the amount of resources that are in Nigeria are pretty significant. You have the shell oil wars that they did back in the 80s and 70s that left the Niger Delta looking basically like a natural disaster. I mean, you couldn't actually go to Niger Delta and buy any fruit or vegetables, or it's a wasteland, right?
Mm-hmm.
You ever been there before?
I've not. I've been to Nigeria several times, but I haven't been to the Delta there.
So how do we stop this this genocide? Call it what you want. Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, there are tribal conflicts happen in Africa. It does happen. You do have the Boerish and the farmers and groups that will have tribal conflict, been doing it for thousands of years. That's not what this is. But this is also heavily funded. I mean, these people are coming in with machinery, and we know that the only place they could get that from is not Islamic forces. I mean, these are U.S. arms in many cases. So how do we get rid of the CIA influence in that area when it most certainly is going to be tied to our intelligence community?
Yeah, so what we're finding actually is that it's the Wagner group, mostly, that's arming these guys from Russia, is what it seems. They're coming in with AKs, driving in on motorcycles and attacking. Now, I think the best way when we look at this is to get the Nigerian government itself to actually put pressure. And I would say President Trump did a very good job with going and threatening both sanctions and then also, threatening military action as well against Nigeria, in having a strong foreign policy. A lot of times you get the NGOs and they come in and they think that what we need more U.S. aid. But what we've been advocating for to equipping the persecuted is not more U.S. aid, but actually a stronger foreign policy is what we need in order to get them to stop. But you're absolutely right. One of the biggest issues is that the Nigerian government just sits back while these attacks are happening, while they're aware of these attacks, and they become complicit as they throw their hands up, almost as Pilate just washing his hands of water and saying, "This sin isn't mine." And so actually calling them out and getting that pressure on them, I think, is really the first step that we need in order to stop this persecution.
Sam, how much time have you spent in the Middle East?
Middle East?
Yeah.
I haven't spent time in the Middle East, just Nigeria.
Just Nigeria. Instead of all the nations, you've been just in Nigeria. Have you been to like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ghana, any of those other countries, Rwanda?
Nope. Nigeria is the only one there.
Okay. So I'm gonna tell you something you maybe don't know.
Okay.
And that is the sophistication of the governments of Nigeria and all these other these African nations is not on par with U.S. Unintelligence. I say unintelligence because we seem to be able to catch one person, but we let a bunch of people kind of walk by, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'm not anti-U.S. government at all. I'm not anti-government. I'm anti-corruption and this thing that we do to simplify things. I was in Sudan. And they said there was genocide and ethnic cleansing in a place called Darfur. Are you familiar with that?
Yep.
Okay. Are you familiar with the history of that?
I'm probably just a little bit, not like obviously not on the ground or anything.
So they sanctioned and President al-Bashir. One thing you need to know about North Sudan is a place called Kanana Sugar. It's one of the largest sugar producers in the entire world. It's owned by multiple nations, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, Britain, a bunch of other places. It's kind of a conglomerate operation. And they said there was ethnic cleansing and genocide. They tried Bashir at The Hague. They said, okay, well, you're guilty of war crimes. So I went up and said, okay, let's look into Darfur. Or they had the comprehensive peace agreement, they had a Darfurian peace agreement, they had the East peace agreement, they had all these agreements. And so I went to Darfur. And there was never any genocide or ethnic cleansing that was happening. It didn't exist. I'm not saying people weren't dying, because they were dying. But we were able to find that there was outside influences mostly. And this is where it gets complicated, because I've spent so much time there that I start to get a little bit disenfranchised with kind of the elements of how we create a narrative. And I know that Christians are dying in Nigeria. I know that for a fact. I know that it's not farmers versus, that's not happening. They're literally knocking off Christians. But who's responsible for it becomes the biggest issue, right? Is the state sponsored? Can the government of Nigeria actually do anything about it? And when the problem gets so big that they can't, then they typically do what they're doing right now, which is analysis paralysis. They just don't do anything. They can't get ahead of it.
Yeah, so I think that there's multiple layers as to kind of what's going on here and what you're asking. And you're asking for like the third or fourth layer back, and so I appreciate that. So the first layer, when we look at this, when it comes to what's happening in Nigeria, is that I do think we do need to establish that it is a genocide, that it is an ethnic cleansing here of trying to go and attack Christians. 20 years ago, Nigeria was about 70% Christian. Now it's down to about 45% Christian. And it is because of the act of jihad, which is, of course, the ideology of Islam. If you go and look at
Boko Haram.
So it starts with of course, Al Qaeda, African ISIS, Boko Haram. And then now it's coming in through the Fulani ethnic militia, if you're following that. But it's all the same ideology here. When you look at this, it's fundamentalist Islam that's really pulled out of looking at the theory of abrogation when it comes to looking at the Quran and looking at the later later revelations that Muhammad had as the superior ones because of all the contradictions that are in the Quran. And I think this is the first layer to look at. Ideologically, that's the first layer that's happening in this attack. That's going on. But you are right; they can't do this on their own. It would be true Boko Haram as well. But the Fulani ethnic militia from the Fulani herdsman tribe there, they wouldn't be able to fund themselves. So you're exactly right. Money is coming in from other places, and there are other strings that are behind this. But what we've seen right now is that actually we are in a place where we can save lives and help lives. Some of the things that we've done is put up like basically alarm towers or tornado sirens for those who are in the Midwest who might understand that a little bit. When attacks start coming, we send those off, and of course, people get out of the way. It's not this huge army that's coming in, but it is the fact that the Christians themselves, because there's no Second Amendment in Nigeria, they have at best homemade, almost blunderbuss type shotguns in order to defend themselves. They don't have an actual defense that's set there. And so right now, the Nigerian government could step in and actually stop the Fulani if they wanted to. And the problem is that they're not. But you are exactly right. There's no way that the Fulani is providing themselves these weapons. They're getting them from somewhere else.
Yeah, but you said Russia. So again, I feel like I'm always apologizing for Russia, but I study what their missions are and what their strategic plan is, not just for 5 years or 10 years. And I'm always curious about Russia because they became the big bad wolf after World War II. And somewhere along the line, they became our ally to our enemy. And it happened over probably a decade and a half. Early 50s is when it really started to, take hold. But I look at that and I go, all right, if I were Russia, I wouldn't provide them with Kalashnikovs and AK-47s. That's just not what I would do, right? If you were trying to be covert about it. Now, if you wanted to openly support it, which they have not, you would do that. But if you wanted to look like somebody else was responsible for it, which is in large part, look, people are just not that bright. Let's just be the average IQ in the United States. I think it's like a 94, right? So people are easily fooled. And so I can say Russia, and ignore what happened. Let's call it in Ukraine, where millions of people have died based on a proxy war that you can call it whatever you want, but it's a proxy war. I mean, those people were fighting against Russia, and frankly, they just wanted life, liberty, pursuit of happiness as well, and they can get it, right? So they got war instead. But I wouldn't, I think that we have to start being academically and institutionally honest about our part in what happens in Nigeria, and that the United States, typically we can say that they can stop killing each other and that the government can step in, but they lack the same basic intelligence that people in the United States lack. They just do. So, why is it that we can't arm the citizens of, and I mean, you're pastors, you may not agree with this, right? But if you go back to Joshua or the Old Testament, New Testament, God did deliver people through violence, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And so how do we get to a place where we can allow them to protect their sovereignty and fight against them, right? Or at least give them that as an option instead of letting them just be slaughtered, which is what's happening right now.
Right. So one of the things that we have as well in Nigeria, one of the things that I've been pretty involved in is the pastors group that we have. We've got a pastors network with over 1,000 pastors. And the first year I was there preaching, you're exactly right. One of the things that his preaching was simply there in Nehemiah, that he built the kingdom of God there, rebuilt Jerusalem with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other to defend himself, and went over that the biblical foundation is for self-defense. And another thing I really encouraged pastors to find was that they need to find Christians to get involved in government. They need to find young Zerubbabels or young governors or young Nehemiahs that can go and actually then support them. One of the biggest issues that they have in Nigeria in the Christianity realm is not a lack of Christians. Of course, you want more Christians, but the nation was, like I said, 70% Christian 20 years ago. And it's about 50-50, just under that right now, between Christian and Muslim. And so one of the big issues is that they vacated the political realm because they were taught that politics is bad. It's ugly. It's ucky. It's bad. But really, they needed to be involved in politics. Now, when I'm explaining, of course, it's going to take a number of years in order to implement that. This isn't a quick fix to look at this. But this is also why laws are so vitally important. Scripture tells us that laws are tutors to us. It teaches us. And in America, I'm thankful that we do have a Second Amendment because it teaches us self-defense, which is a biblical concept. Jesus even told his disciples to take a sword with them.
Yeah.
Sir, do you want to jump in there?
No. I was just going through the Bible verse of sell your cloak and buy a sword.
Yep.
And when he sliced off the ear, he said, no. But it wasn't because he was saying not to go to violence. He says it wasn't necessary at the time. I think there's I studied Aramaic and Arabic and the kind of the roots of words, and we've misinterpreted quite a few, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I mean, part of the problem is if I can be, a little bit candid here, in America especially, but then it's because we've exported it through missions in America, we really have an effeminate Christianity that doesn't really understand that evil actually does exist. It actually does need to be opposed, and it actively needs to be opposed. And this is in every area. I love the introduction on your show that you had because you're standing up even in the realm of voting machines, even in the realm of elections. There's corruption, as you can imagine, in Nigeria with elections as well. More literally on the people showing up and literally physically stealing ballots there. But that is a place where Christians need to step in the void, because what is stealing? Well, that's a violation of the 10 Commandments. What is lying? That's another violation of the 10 Commandments. And this is a problem that we have because Christians look out and we've gone and exported our moral code by saying, you know what, we need to replace this with love covers a multitude of sin. Well, it does, but it only covers that multitude of sin if sin is actually recognizable as breaking the law. And so those laws need to be there. There is no place for mercy until justice is established.
You remember the saying of John Adams that mercy for the guilty is, what is it? Mercy for the guilty is an atrocity for the innocent.
I think that's right. That sounds like John Adams anyway.
We I said something this morning, and you said I want a biblical perspective because I don't think that I think Nigeria is a larger symptom to our problem. It's not the problem.
That's
Right?
fair.
We have run away from humanity. We have taken God out of everything, and we've tried to solve things secularly, and we've made everything about the boogeyman, right? So everything's about racism, everything's about homophobic, transphobic, all this other stuff. We don't get to so we debate the ridiculous when we have a
Mhm.
basis for what is not ridiculous. The Bible is not ridiculous, right? It's very clear, right?
Right.
And even if you were to argue that the Quran was a secondary book, even if you were to agree that, which I'm not agreeing to, right? But I'm saying that even if you were to agree to it, there's so much that they've misinterpreted about that book that allowed them to go do bad stuff that it's gotten to the point now where we have God fighting God, right? And
Mhm.
so we've allowed evil to get a seat at the table, not just in the United States but around the world. So 12,000 people in the last 20 years have died in Chicago, right?
Yep.
It's a blip on the map, and we have the ability to defend ourselves, but then we strip our ability to defend ourselves. And the same thing was happening in Nigeria. We could make it so that every home there is protected and is behind a wall that allows for violence to become the answer, or force to become the answer against evil, because evil never just crawls back into its hole, right?
Right.
And yet we forbade people from doing that because we're like, no, we have a better answer for you, and the answer is no answer. We're gonna give sanctions, which ultimately may punish ISIS, but who does it punish more? It punishes the very people you say you're there to protect.
Yeah, if the government doesn't actually listen to it there in Nigeria and doesn't actually accomplish what it needs to, that it would have the trickle down effect. There's no doubt about that. Um, and I think that you bring up something really interesting because you're pointing out that a secular point of view, the secular worldview, it's insufficient in order to fix any of these problems. And the reason it's insufficient to fix these problems is because nature abhors a vacuum. Every law comes from a moral arbiter. And so when we look at this concept, someone has to be right. And so when we're making these moral decisions, which is what a law is, we're making this a moral judgment, and we're saying something is right and wrong while saying that right and wrong doesn't exist, and trying to straddle the fence. And that does lead us to that paralysis that you were describing in the face of evil. And paralysis in the face of evil is complicity with it, and that's where we have a problem. I would say mostly in America is we have de facto cowardice is our trait, and we need courage, and that requires standing up for what's right, but it understands recognizing that there is actually right and there is actually wrong.
Yeah, but it also takes force, right? By
Yes.
the way, how much time do I have from you? How much time? How much more time do I have from you?
I probably got about I can do another 10 minutes.
Okay, I want to put this up there because I've been accused of being the tip of the spear when it comes to wanting to fight. Now, I didn't start out that way. They went after my family first. They came to my home to do harm. They came there with guns, and they attacked my wife and my children. So, hence, I would really like to just get back to technology and not have to do this show. But I do this show because I think it's necessary, because I think that people lack basic intelligence, and in most part, most people just repeat the same thing over and over again, depending on what show you jump on. So I ask some harder questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I put something up there that I thought was interesting, and I basically said that I reject the idea that violence is not the answer, and I say that, Sam, with a heavy heart. There's no part of me that wants to be violent. There's no part of me that wants to go to violence, but silence is violence, and we've seen people do harm to our brothers and sisters. We've seen the system take away what isn't theirs to take on the education side, or the medical side, or even on the leadership side, and even stolen elections is a greater symptom of the fact that we don't have any courage, and we're not holding people accountable. So how do we solve this problem in Nigeria, which is a larger problem that we face in multiple nations, when it should be rip the Band-Aid off, go in there, destroy it? But then we look at Mexico, and you have cartels and the government, and the cartel is the government. And now we look at the US, and the cartels and the government, and the cartels are the government. go to Nigeria and the government, this cartels. See what's happening here?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do it? How do you do it without, how do we do it from a biblical standpoint? How do we save these people? But we stop acting like we have to just wait.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And one of the things to first of all hit on is that foundation that sometimes violence is the answer, and it is the answer sometimes even biblically. I believe Jesus comes back, and I believe he comes back with a sword. Unapologetically believing that that is violence when we look at this. And so violence isn't exclusive outside of the biblical worldview, and I think that's important. But it is a more defensive posture of a violence. Now, that defensive posture, I don't say that trying to curb anything. I say this in that concept of looking out and saying that there must be an offense first. We're not going out and pre-committing violence or something like that. It's a responsive nature to evil. In one of the things that I think is important is we have to find the clarity and to see who is the enemy. Now, we have no shortage of enemies today. When it comes to the United States, when it comes to goodness, when it comes to when I say the West, I mean that idea of Western civilization that we're built upon on the Christian foundations, and looking at that. We have no shortage of enemies today. And one of the reasons why I think that Nigeria should have a value system here, why we should care about this, is because you can see the jihad that's moving down, and it's been moving down for decades, if not getting up to centuries here at this point, from northern Africa, that it's coming down. That's the systemic movement of Islam. And Nigeria is the most populated country. It's probably one of the most resource-rich nations in Africa. And if you take out Nigeria, you're going to get the rest of Africa. And then that becomes an entire continent that is taken over by Islam. And so that becomes, I believe, a priority for us to stop that, because this creates an entire continent that becomes an enemy, not just someone who's neutral to us or a weak ally that can't help us, but actually someone that is actively against us and wanting to destroy us. Where your comparison with Mexico, certainly the cartels are a problem. Certainly the cartels are hurting America and are in some ways literally killing Americans in that way. But I don't necessarily know if that's the cartel's goal, is to take over America. They're doing this because they're evil and they're selfish, but not because they necessarily have an ideology that's trying to destroy America and trying to destroy all goodness. They just are acting outside of the sin of their heart in looking at that. And so I would put that not as a non-problem, but as a secondary problem when it comes to what's happening there in Nigeria. And so that's kind of how I would look at that and cut those, if that kind of makes sense with what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself really looking at this from a unemotional. Like, I don't care about the feelings right now. I think God gives us common sense, and he says, he sends us into battle. And when I would talk about just the stuff like Job or Daniel or David. I mean, go down the line. There's so many of them, even Moses and Abraham, and stoning of the guy that basically, or that was working on the Sabbath. And that there was just certain things that if you go through the Bible, it's a very violent book, right? But it talks about consequences. I look at this from the standpoint of consequences. If you have an AK-47 and you're out there to do harm, I'm going to banana boat you just like they did to the Venezuelans that are running drugs off the shores, right?
Yeah.
Now, a part of me looks at that and goes, "Oh man, I don't want to be indiscriminate." Then I use the jelly bean rule, right? Like, oh, I killed 2 innocent people when I knocked out these 4 ISIS members. Right. And I'm like, well, those jelly beans were hanging out with bad jelly beans. So I got to throw out the bad jelly beans, and I might get a couple good ones. I mean, is that philosophy hold? And this is my struggle, is that I don't want to do harm to innocents, just like I don't want to become the very thing that I'm fighting against.
Right.
So how do you measure that without understanding that you're going to take out some good with the bad?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the big way to parse that is one, we have to put it within the jurisdiction of where it needs to be. And so when we look at the concept of asking, is a war a just war? Of course, there are going to be potential of righteous people or innocent people that end up dying inside of a just war that are on the wrong side of things, whether it was by their choice or whether it was just that's where they were. That will happen at times, but we wouldn't want to go and to take that upon ourselves and have that be vigilante justice. And we would want to make sure that the war is actually just, because as I'm sure you have seen, a lot of the wars that we go out and perform, they're not just. We're on the wrong side of the issue at times, or maybe we're not even on the wrong side of the issue in a sense that the person we're going against isn't evil, but in a sense of maybe we end up going and establishing a greater evil because we are a greater evil than what they were doing at that time. So that's something we also have to guard against as a country.
Which leads me back to the fact that we have huge amounts of corruption and people that are in power that call themselves believers in God, one way or another, and then it makes me want to say, okay, so if that's the case, and the world is in a much worse place than it was 20 years ago, it's just the degradation is absolutely clear, and we can see all these bad things, but the good people lack courage. Pastor, they lack courage, basic courage, because they want to watch TV. They want to eat their TV dinner. But what can the Christian church do? What can the Christian church do? You know, we reach millions of people every month on our podcast. How do we get the American church to mobilize and do the same thing? It is tens of millions, hundreds of millions. How does it mobilize in such a way that it can have a huge effect on what happens, in not just in Nigeria, but in protecting the basic ethos of our own nation?
Yeah, I mean, the evil of our nation is incredible. We rip babies limb from limb inside the wombs of their mother. We allow mothers to go and to poison themselves, and then the pro-life movement itself goes and says it's those mothers who have just killed their own children that they themselves are the victims, even though they're the ones who went and procured the pill and willingly took it. I mean, the evil in our nation is absolutely incredible. And I think that there's two things that we need to do. One is that we need to return to the law of God. One of the biggest issues that we have in our nation right now is that we believe, especially within the Christian ethos, that if you vote R enough, if you vote Republican enough, you are going to save our nation. Well, I live inside Iowa, where we have a supermajority in the Senate, the House. We have a Republican governor. We've had the trifecta for, I believe it's 9 years now. And we have an all-appointed Supreme Court justices are all appointed by Republicans right now. And yet we're still dealing with property rights. We're still dealing with life. We're still dealing with marriage. We're still dealing with all of the things that are literally on the Republican platform. The issue isn't that we need to vote Republican more. The issue is a different R issue, and that is a repentance issue. We need to repent. And the only way we're going to repent is through the proclamation of God's law, that there is a law, that there is a king, and that we have violated his law, and that we need to bow our knee unto King Jesus. And so I think that we need to bring that message back, the message of repentance. We need to stop asking the question, what will get more people rears in the seats and bucks in the offering plate. We need to stop looking at butts and bucks, and we need to start looking at what does God say, and we need to unapologetically proclaim that message. But I think the biggest issue that we have is that we have cowardly pastors. Instead of the Black Robe Regiment, which we had in 1776, we've got the Pink Cardigan Brigade. That's the real issue here. We've got a bunch of pastors wearing pink cardigans out there, and they're preaching these wimpy messages, and they're not actually proclaiming the word of God. And so we need to drive those hirelings out and get real shepherds in America again.
Well, you know, that came from the institutions that, you know, they had the great run through institutions in our country, the Marxist run, and that did not preclude, or did not exclude, I should say, the church. I mean, they went after the seminaries. They went after the theological centers. They created wolves in sheep's clothing and put them as mega pastors, and had them. They were afraid to talk about things at the pulpit because they were told not to, because it's politics. It has nothing to do with politics. It's ethics. It's morals, right? And the second that the ethics and morals became apologetics for politics is the day that we lost our ability to stand up from right for wrong. Like we lost our it turned gray, right? Mm-hmm. And God says anything that is black should also be white, and anything in between that's gray is not real. It's not based on any sort of principles. It's based on feelings or your own belief that becomes very it allows you to get away with being a bad person, right? You said pink cardigans with, I would say, even the ones with the rainbow deals saying that, you know, sin is not sin, right? So, yeah. Well, Pastor, I thank you for coming on. You wrote a book.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to read it. I just got done reading Fred Galvin's book, who was Marsoc. I sent him a text message saying, I'm more upset now than I was before. So I'm hoping that I get more from your book, 5 Steps to Kill a Nation. Where can people find it, and where can people follow you?
Yeah, so you can find 5 Steps to Kill a Nation at it's at enemieswithinthechurch.com. There are enemieswithinthechurch.com right there in the store. It'll have 5 Steps to Kill a Nation, and you can get it right there. And then also while you're there, you should check out the video, the documentary Enemies Within the Church. Just what you're talking about, how Marxists have infiltrated the church. That's what it really exposes there, and how they did that in the institutions there in the church. Pastor Kerry Gordon does a great job with that. And so I just encourage everyone to check that out. That's at enemieswithinthechurch.com.
All right. Pastor Sam, thank you. I appreciate you coming on today. And I'll definitely follow you as well. I'll do that right now. But yeah, so I asked different questions because I've been there. So I know I'm a little bit more cynical, but it's not a cynicism that's based on a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience. I have the experience, and I always want to see, I kind of press the limits a little bit on what it is that we're really facing, so we can see the true enemy, right?
Absolutely. Those are great questions that you asked. And anybody's listening to the show, I do want to point this out because I've done several interviews on Nigeria here. The questions that you're asking are the ones that actually are getting the most layers off from anyone I've seen, including people who are from Nigeria. I've been interviewed by people who are from Nigeria, and they don't see it nearly as deeply as what you're pointing out. And this is important because people do need to start thinking. That's what we have lost the ability to think in America today.
If you can't think, you can't solve problems, and then you're captured. You're literally captured. You're a slave. And then the Bible is very clear on bondage and how to get out of bondage. And it's almost got its own prescription, right? But we have to be willing to stand up and do the right thing. Someone has to dance first. And I think that's the interesting part about where we're going, is that pastors can only be courageous if they see someone else that they can follow that's courageous.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, Sam, God bless you, brother.
God bless you. And thank you so much for having me on.
All right, take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in and watching that interview between Pastor Sam Jones and Joe. Just a lot of info there to digest. Wow. Simply wow. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Remember, keep enjoying your families, and we will see you here again on Monday, right here at Untamed Nation. See you later.
Rise up untamed, in the heart of the fire where the wild ones roam. Joe Oltmann's calling, bringing truth back home. From conservative daily to this untamed fire, we shatter the silence, lifting spirits higher. No chains can hold us, no lies can prevail. Authentic and fearless on this rugged trail. Patriots gather under stars and stripes. Untamed nation, igniting the night. Untamed nation, let the truth roll out in this land of the free. Standing proud from sea to shining sea, we won't back down. Catch the fire, wear the crown. Untamed nation, it's our battle song, motivating hearts where the brave belong. Yeah, untamed and wild, forever strong. Play it again all night long. Break the mold, chase the real. No more games, time to heal. Joe's voice leads the untamed crew. Truth matters through and through. Untamed nation, let the the truth roll out in this land of the free. Standing proud from sea to shining sea, we won't back down. Catch the fire, wear the crown, tame nation. It's our battle song, motivating hearts where the brave